Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where you and I journey beneath the surface of today's most compelling ideas. Today, we're taking on a truly fascinating and often misunderstood set of concepts, known collectively as post-liberalism. It's a current that's definitely gaining traction in various intellectual circles, shaping discussions from philosophy right through to policy. And you might be hearing this term more and more in public discourse. So our mission today is simple: give you a clear, structured understanding of what it actually entails, try and demystify a complex movement that's, sparking a lot of debate across different parts of society.
Yes, absolutely. And it's a weighty topic because post-liberalism isn't just one single thing. It's more like a constellation of critiques, proposals too, that fundamentally question the liberal tradition. The one that's been so dominant in Western thought for centuries. It's definitely not a monolithic ideology with like a single manifesto. It's more a collection of shared dissatisfactions with the status quo and, a variety of alternative visions for society. But for you, we want to do more than just describe it. We're going to try and break it down into its core components, hopefully help you see the intricate layers that make up this whole intellectual movement.
Absolutely. And for each component, we're going to thoughtfully contrast it with what we're calling classic American liberalism. This is the tradition that has, really deep roots in a particular moral philosophy, which we'll definitely get into, and the very principles enshrined in the founding documents of American liberalism itself. It's the framework that has, largely guided American society for generations, emphasizing individual rights, limited government, and a certain understanding of universal truths. So, get ready. We're going to explore some pretty profound ideas and see how fundamentally different philosophical foundations can lead to very, very different visions for how society should be organized. And, crucially, what actually constitutes human flourishing.
What is post-liberalism? A 30,000-foot view.
Okay, let's try and unpack this big picture first. What is this idea, post-liberalism at its very core? Like from a 30,000-foot view, it seems to emerge when the traditional liberal order, which is often characterized by, procedural neutrality. It's a strong emphasis on individual autonomy and free markets when that whole setup is seen as, insufficient for genuine human flourishing. Let's maybe break that down for a sec. Procedural neutrality.
Oh.
That's the state trying to be impartial about the big moral questions.
Exactly. Creating a level playing field, supposedly.
Without endorsing one particular worldview, like religious freedom you mentioned, the state doesn't pick Christianity or Islam or atheism.
It aims to be neutral.
Allowing individuals to choose. Then there's individual autonomy, putting the individual first. Self-direction, choice, often seen as the highest good, and free markets, the engine of economic life, individual transactions. Post-liberalism looks at all this and basically says, hang on, this system isn't delivering what we truly need as humans, as a society.
It's leaving something vital out.
Or even eroding it.
Yeah.
They argue, that maybe the system offers freedom from things, but not necessarily freedom for a shared, meaningful life.
And what's truly fascinating here, I think, is that post-liberalism is fundamentally a reaction. You can see it as a direct response to what many of its proponents perceive as a kind of moral vacuum.
Okay.
Or even, deep civilizational disintegration.
Wow.
And they see that resulting from liberalism becoming sort of unmoored from traditional sources of wisdom, virtue, or maybe spiritual transcendence. When a society prioritizes individual freedom and neutrality above all else, some argue it leads to a loss of shared meaning.
Right.
A dilution of collective purpose, an erosion of a strong sense of collective identity. It's like asking, what happens when we lose our anchors? What happens when there's no longer a widely accepted framework for what the good life is, beyond just individual preference? This perceived lack of a cohesive moral or spiritual foundation, a sense of a shared good beyond just what I want. That's a central driving force for post-liberal thought. They'd say this unmooring has led to a society that's rich in choices, maybe, but poor in meaning, leading to social fragmentation.
But this is a crucial distinction, right? It's not just about wanting to go back.
No, not simply nostalgia.
It's not simply nostalgia for some idealized past, even though elements might feel traditional, maybe evoking older forms of social organization or, moral certainty. Instead, post-liberalism aims to reconstitute society. That's the key word.
Yes.
It seeks a new integration. Metaphysics, these big questions about reality, with politics, with identity, and this is where it gets really compelling for me. It often blends these profound theological insights, deep concepts of ethnos.
Peoplehood, yeah.
Peoplehood, a particular lens on conflict and statecraft. It mixes them all into a new, hopefully coherent ideological form.
It's a bold attempt, really, building something new, drawing on different traditions to create what they see as a more integrated, more fulfilling social order.
It's definitely about rebuilding, not just like turning back the clock.
Right, rethinking the very foundations.
And that's precisely why, for you listening, we're going to break it down into 7 distinct, though, interconnected components.
Think of them as the building blocks.
Yeah, the building blocks of this complex intellectual movement, each one representing a particular critique of the liberal way of doing things and a proposed alternative.
And they aren't isolated ideas, are they? They often interlock, reinforce each other, forming this comprehensive challenge.
Exactly. So to help you navigate them, we can sort of group them. The first 3 deal with how post-liberalism sees truth, reality, the flow of history.
Okay.
Then the next 2 focus on the state and its role.
Right.
And the final 2 get into their understanding of society dynamics conflict.
Got it. So what are they?
Okay, the 7 components are conceptualism,
Mm-hmm.
tiered transcendental eschatology,
Okay, that's a big one.
ethnotraditionalist, dialectical historicism,
Right.
integralism,
Uh-huh.
Hegelian statism,
Okay.
conflict theory,
And finally.
and Manichaean critical theory.
Okay. Each of those definitely deserves a closer look. And maybe more importantly, that thoughtful contrast with the tradition of classic American liberalism. That should really help you see the profound differences in their basic assumptions and their ultimate goals.
Conceptualism, what is real, and how do we know it?
All right, let's dive into the first component then, conceptualism. What's the core idea here? It's the universals, things like justice, liberty, maybe beauty, even identity itself. These things are real, but they are mind-dependent.
Mind-dependent. Okay,
Right.
what does that actually mean in practice?
Well, it means they're not like floating eternal forms out there in some platonic realm, existing totally independent of human thought or culture.
Right, not like Plato's farms.
Exactly. They aren't just out there waiting to be discovered, unchanging, absolute. But, and this is key, they're also not merely arbitrary names we just stick on things, completely subjective with no shared meaning, like a nominalist might argue.
Somewhere in between.
Kind of. They have a reality that emerges from our collective minds and traditions, from shared human experiences, language, cultural practices. They're real within the framework of human understanding, not external to it. But they are collectively real, not just individually imagined.
Like a shared language. That's not inherent in nature, but it's definitely real because we all agree on it.
That's a great analogy. It's powerful because of that collective agreement.
Okay, so how does this play out in post-liberalism? This understanding allows certain concepts, especially things like identity, tradition, nationhood, to be treated as profoundly, spiritually and politically real.
Exactly. If universals are mind-dependent, then concepts forged through generations of shared experience, collective belief, communal memory, they can take on a very concrete, very powerful reality for a people.
And that's crucial because it means these collective identities don't have to be, say, biologically fixed or metaphysically eternal in some absolute sense to still hold immense weight and meaning within a society.
Right. They get their power, their truth, from the continuous shared mental and spiritual work of that community.
So it opens up a different way of thinking about collective identity, one that emphasizes the internal communal construction of these shared realities.
Precisely. Rather than relying on external, immutable, or, biologically determined truths, the insight is if truth is made through shared experience rather than found universally, it really shifts where the authority lies in defining identity, even reality itself, for a specific community.
Okay, now let's contrast that. Classic American liberalism. You said it's grounded in common sense realism.
Yes, that's the traditional philosophical grounding. And what's fascinating here is that this tradition affirms that moral truths principles like justice, liberty, individual rights are universally accessible to human reason. They're intuitively real, inherent in the world, discoverable by everyone, not just conceptual categories we collectively build.
So the idea is certain truths are self-evident, grasped by ordinary human understanding.
Pretty much. Without needing complex philosophy or special spiritual insights. It's the belief that these moral principles are objectively discoverable, almost like scientific laws, even if applying them gets tricky.
Like a moral grammar to the universe, maybe, and we can all understand the basics.
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
It feels like a subtle difference, but actually really profound for you to think about. For classic American liberalism, it's not just that people happen to agree on liberty.
No.
It's the belief that liberty, as a moral truth, is actually woven into the very nature of humanity, and we can discern it with our individual consciences.
Right. It implies a moral order built into reality itself, accessible through things like reason, intuition, things all humans share.
So the foundation for classic American liberalism is moral objectivity, something discoverable.
Discoverable through shared human faculties, universal experience, rather than something that mainly evolves as a social construct based on collective mental agreement, like in conceptualism.
That distinction, truth being found versus truth being made, seems absolutely central to understanding these two worldviews.
It really is, and it has massive implications for how they view law, rights, even who gets to decide what's true in a society.
Tiered transcendental eschatology, the direction of history.
All right, next up,
Okay.
tiered transcendental eschatology. That is definitely a mouthful.
It is, isn't it? But the core idea, what it's getting at, is how post-liberalism views the fundamental structure of reality, almost like an ontological pyramid, you could say, and how history moves through that structure.
An ontological pyramid.
Okay.
Explain that.
It suggests reality is tiered. You've got the material at the bottom, the physical world we sense, our bodies, nature, daily stuff.
Right, the everyday.
And then the spiritual is at the top, representing higher, non-material realities, often with divine or metaphysical significance, concepts that go beyond the purely physical.
Okay, so levels, material, spiritual.
And the direction of history itself is seen as upward, a purposeful movement through these tiers, progressing towards some kind of transcendental fulfillment.
Fulfillment like what?
Often envisioned as a sacralized state, maybe? Or a redeemed civilization, a society that has integrated its material and spiritual sides to reflect some higher divine order. So it's not just random history happening, it's a grand narrative of ascent where the political and social order becomes infused with sacred meaning.
Okay, so if we connect that to the bigger picture, the ultimate goal here isn't individual liberty in the way we usually think of it.
Not primarily, no. Not freedom from external constraints being the main thing. That's more of a horizontal freedom, perhaps.
So what is it then?
It's integration, a vertical ascent. It's about the spiritualization of the political order, where the state and society aren't just secular arrangements for managing practical stuff, but they actively participate in and reflect a divine or metaphysical hierarchy.
So the highest good isn't individual freedom.
In this sphere, no. It's active participation in this metaphysical hierarchy, one that seeks to unite the nation, liturgy, destiny, all into one coherent whole.
It sounds like a kind of collective spiritual journey.
Exactly, where the individual finds purpose and meaning, not just in their own autonomy, but in their place within this grand spiritual and political design.
You can imagine a society where everything, law, art, daily life, is intentionally lined up to move towards this higher spiritual plane.
And this perspective often looks at modern secular societies and sees them as sort of stuck on the material level, incapable of real flourishing because they deny or ignore that spiritual dimension.
Okay, let's contrast that again. Classic American liberalism. You said it's also teleological, believes in human purpose, a telos.
Yes, it does believe humans have a purpose, but it is decidedly not transcendentalist in this specific multi-tiered way.
So what's the purpose then in the classic American liberal view?
It's understood as the cultivation of virtue within freedom. It's about individuals becoming morally excellent, responsible, self-governing, all within a framework of natural rights.
Not about achieving a sacralized state.
No, not about seeing human destiny tied to some divinely ordained, spiritually complete political structure. The emphasis is much more on the individual's moral journey, their capacity for self-improvement, civic responsibility.
The goal is a virtuous citizenry, not a sacred state.
Precisely.
So this raises a really important question for both traditions. What's the fundamental ordering principle of society?
Good question. For classic American liberalism, it's moral conscience, not some overarching spiritual eschatology dictating how society must be structured.
So the good society isn't seen as needing to be theologically complete.
No, not at all. It doesn't need to achieve a divine state on earth. Rather, it's constitutionally ordered to secure natural rights
Okay.
and to actively cultivate virtue among its citizens. The focus is on creating a framework where individuals can pursue moral goodness and civic responsibility through their own free choices.
Guided by conscience and universal moral truth.
Right. Rather than being directed by a sacred state towards some predetermined spiritual destiny. The aim is to create conditions for people to live moral lives, not to make them moral by state decree or spiritual compulsion.
Ethnotraditionalist, dialectical historicism, the story of a people.
Okay, next up, ethnotraditionalist dialectical historicism.
Another big one. What's this about? History.
Essentially, yeah. This is post-liberalism's historical motor, you could say, how it understands the flow and meaning of history and collective identity. It views peoples often using the Greek term ethnoi.
Right, specific cultural or ethnic groups.
Exactly, groups with a shared heritage, common language, often a spiritual bond. It sees these ethnoi as being spiritually unique. Each one carries a distinct spirit, a particular character, a unique contribution to history's unfolding.
And traditions.
Traditions in this framework are understood as the embodied memory of that specific people, carrying their unique spiritual and historical essence. History, then, is often seen as a dialectical process, their rise, their fragmentation, and then a hoped-for restoration. It's a narrative of a collective spiritual journey for the ethnos. Periods of flourishing, decline, and ultimately this longing for renewal, a return to their authentic spiritual core.
So it really emphasizes rootedness, continuity over universalism or individual choice in shaping identity.
Absolutely.
Now, this is where it gets particularly insightful, I think, for you listening. This perspective can lead to the nation becoming almost mythic.
Yeah, taking on a sacred quality.
Right, transcending just political boundaries or economic deals. It's not just a collection of individuals or a political construct, but like a living entity with a soul, a destiny, a unique spiritual identity derived from its ethnos. Politics then becomes ancestral, deeply tied to inherited narratives, collective memory, the spiritual legacy of past generations.
And identity isn't primarily about abstract values like freedom or equality that apply to everyone regardless of background.
No, it's understood through this inherited metaphysical memory rooted in a specific people. Your identity, your very being, is seen as largely defined by your connection to this shared past, this unique ethnos, and its historical path.
It can create a very strong sense of belonging and purpose, for sure.
But it also fundamentally redefines who we are, doesn't it?
It does. And the contrast with classic American liberalism is really stark here. In that tradition, the citizen is not primarily seen as a vessel of a particular ethnos or bloodline.
Not a bearer of ancestral memory defining their whole being.
No. Instead, they're understood as a bearer of universal human reason and moral agency.
Meaning everyone, regardless of background, has this capacity for rational thought, moral judgment, makes them fundamentally equal, capable of self-governance.
Exactly. The republic itself isn't tribal. It's seen as covenantal, built on shared principles and agreements like a constitution, a Bill of Rights.
Rather than ethnic identity.
Right. It's a political community formed by consent, by a shared commitment to certain ideals, not by shared ancestry. Think of it as built on shared ideas, not shared blood.
Yeah, and it's not like traditions don't matter for classic American liberalism or culture's irrelevant. Of course they matter. They provide richness, continuity, shape our customs.
Sure.
But for classic American liberalism, the fundamental foundation is natural rights inherent to all humans just because they're human.
Right.
It's the consent of the governed legitimacy comes from the people agreeing to be ruled.
Typically through a constitution, yeah.
And it's the individual conscience, empowering individuals to make moral judgments, follow their own path within the law.
These principles are prioritized over any idea of a mythic bloodline, sacred soil, or some ethnically determined destiny.
So while appreciating cultural heritage, the emphasis stays on universal human dignity and the individual's capacity for reason and moral choice, transcending any particular ethnic or ancestral claim.
A very different starting point.
Integralism, state, and sacred order.
Okay, let's explore integralism now. This perspective argues that the state must be ordered toward the highest good.
And that highest good is typically defined in theological terms.
Right. So this is a direct, fundamental rejection of the idea that the state should be neutral on ultimate truth or morality.
Absolutely. Integralism posits that the state has a positive duty to guide society towards its spiritual and moral perfection, as understood through a specific religious or theological framework.
So the spheres of church and state, not strictly separated.
No. Instead, they're envisioned as being harmonized under a singular moral order. The sacred governs the temporal.
The temporal power of the state serves the higher spiritual ends, fostering a society aligned with divine law.
That's the idea, creating a truly integrated society where all aspects of life, including politics, are oriented towards a divine purpose.
So in post-liberal thought, how does this often manifest, like a sacral state?
Often, yes. Or something very close to a national church, even if it's not explicitly called that. It implies a society where religious truth isn't just tolerated, but actively promoted and upheld by the government, influencing policy, education, cultural norms.
Which represents a clear, direct rejection of liberal neutrality.
Totally. That idea that the state should stay impartial on ultimate moral or religious questions.
And what's thought-provoking here is the active desire for the state to promote a particular moral vision.
Yes, seeing it as essential for the true well-being, the flourishing of the community, not as a threat to individual liberty.
They'd argue that a state claiming neutrality isn't really neutral anyway.
Exactly. They'd say it just promotes a different set of implicit values, usually secular individualistic ones, and that this leads to societal decay. So they seek to bring explicit moral order back into the public square through state action.
Okay, now, classic American liberalism. It also rejects complete moral neutrality, right? It affirms a public morality based on natural law.
Yes, absolutely. It believes a healthy society needs citizens to adhere to certain basic moral principles. Government has a role in fostering a virtuous citizenry.
Understanding that a self-governing people needs a moral compass.
Right, but, and this is crucial, it does not embrace theocratic fusion.
It draws a firm line against merging religious authority with state power.
It seeks to preserve religious liberty, the autonomy of the individual conscience, within that public moral framework. It's a very distinct balance.
Aiming for a morally upright society without imposing a specific religious doctrine via state power.
Allowing individuals the freedom to pursue their own spiritual paths, form their own religious associations, independent of the state. The government's role is to protect the space for virtue, not dictate it.
So this really brings up that question about the boundaries of government power. What is its legitimate role in fostering a moral society?
Well, classic American liberalism recognizes that government is not the keeper of the soul.
Can't compel faith or dictate inner conviction.
Nor should it try. However, it also firmly believes that a free people must necessarily be a moral people.
The health of a republic, ordered liberty itself, depends heavily on the virtue of its citizens. Liberty without virtue can become chaos.
Exactly. Therefore, liberty and virtue have to be cultivated together in tandem, even if the state's role in that cultivation is carefully limited.
So maybe promoting civic education, encouraging responsible citizenship by example, upholding laws reflecting natural moral principles.
Things like that.
Yeah.
But always within the bounds of protecting individual conscience and freedom of belief, leaving the deeper spiritual formation to individuals and private institutions.
Hegelian statism, the state as embodiment.
Okay, let's turn to Hegelian statism. This view elevates the state to a pretty significant philosophical position. It's seen as the very embodiment of the moral and spiritual life of the people.
So much more than just a functional administrative body or a practical contract between individuals for mutual protection, like classical liberals might say.
Far more. It's understood as an authoritative, concrete, yet conceptual universal.
Okay, unpack conceptual universal for us.
It means the state isn't just a collection of institutions, but a living expression of the collective will, the spirit, the destiny of a nation. This gives it a kind of metaphysical weight that transcends individual interests. It even pre-exists them in a profound sense. The state becomes the highest expression of a people's development and purpose.
Wow. So if the state is seen that way, as this ultimate embodiment of a collective spirit and purpose, it naturally becomes the arbiter of ethics, destiny, even the nature of community itself.
That's the logic. Its laws and institutions aren't just rules. They're reflections of a higher moral purpose, almost an unfolding historical necessity.
And for you listening, this means freedom itself gets profoundly redefined.
Absolutely.
It's no longer primarily about independence from state power, right? Asserting your rights against the government, being left alone?
No. Instead, true freedom is understood as integration into the rational state, aligning your individual will with the collective will expressed through the state.
That is a profound shift, where individual freedom is realized by contributing to and participating in the state's greater purpose, finding your place within its grand design.
Rather than standing apart from it, You find true freedom through the state, not against it.
Okay. Classic American liberalism, by stark contrast, takes a very different stance here.
Oh, completely. It firmly says no to the idea of the state as some kind of metaphysical authority, a spiritual entity with a will of its own above its citizens. Instead, it views the state as primarily a moral tool, a necessary but limited instrument.
Created by the people, for the people, to serve specific, limited purposes.
Exactly. Securing natural rights, ensuring justice, providing common defense, promoting general welfare.
So it must be limited, constitutional, accountable.
Yes. Limited by a constitution, constitutional in its powers, and fundamentally accountable both to the people it serves and to an overarching natural law. That natural law dictates universal moral principles, placing boundaries on state action, preventing tyranny.
The state is a servant, not a master.
And its legitimacy flows from the consent and virtue of the governed.
And for classic American liberalism, you're saying it's the citizen's virtue, your virtue, rather than any grand metaphysical claims about the state that truly gives legitimacy to the political regime.
That's right. The system works best and stays free when its citizens are virtuous, responsible, actively engaged in civic life.
So it places the primary responsibility for a good society squarely on the moral character of its citizens.
Yes, on their capacity for self-governance, their commitment to civic duties, rather than on the state having some inherent spiritual authority or being an embodiment of a collective spirit.
It's a bottom-up view of legitimacy. The strength of the republic comes from the moral strength and active participation of its people, shaping their own destiny through self-governance.
Not through some state-led spiritual evolution.
Conflict theory society is battleground.
Okay, next. Let's consider how post-liberalism often adopts a particular lens, conflict theory. Whether it's seen through divisions of class, culture, religion, even civilization. There seems to be this inherent belief that order often emerges from hierarchy.
Right. Not from negotiation or compromise among equals.
It's not about finding common ground or building consensus among diverse groups. In fact, it might see those attempts as naive.
Or even detrimental to genuine order, yeah. Instead, it's about recognizing fundamental power dynamics, maybe irreconcilable differences, and believing a stable order is achieved when a particular group or ideology or set of values establishes dominance, creates a clear, acknowledged hierarchy.
So peace, in this framework, is more often envisioned as something enforced.
Enforced through strength and authority, through the victory of one vision, rather than something achieved through open dialogue, mutual understanding, or consensus building among competing interests. And what's especially compelling here, I think, is an underlying belief that society is, in a profound sense, always in a kind of war.
A war, not necessarily literal violence.
Not always, no. Though it can manifest that way. More often, it's an ideological war of meanings. Competing traditions, cultural narratives, entire civilizations clashing for cultural and ideological supremacy.
Like a constant, unavoidable struggle for dominance over values, over the definition of the good ways of life.
Exactly. This perspective emphasizes fundamental antagonisms as driving forces, where true reconciliation or genuine integration between deeply opposed groups or ideas is seen as either impossible or maybe even undesirable.
And the goal is to secure the victory of one's own vision or moral framework.
Right. They might argue that the liberal attempt to just paper over these fundamental conflicts only makes them simmer and explode later.
But classic American liberalism operates from a very different starting point, a different assumption.
It does.
While it definitely acknowledges conflict is real, unavoidable people will always have different interests, opinions, moral frameworks.
Sure, that's just human nature.
It fundamentally assumes that a shared moral and rational core among people allows for civil discourse, for compromise, for constitutional governance to actually work.
It believes in the capacity of individuals to reason together, find solutions, live peacefully despite differences, because of certain universal human faculties and shared understandings of justice and right accessible to all.
It sees conflict as something to be managed and resolved within a framework of rules.
Not as the perpetual defining characteristic of society that must always end in one side dominating.
The goal is to channel conflict constructively, not eliminate it by force.
Which brings up that important question. How is conflict handled in these two frameworks? What does it mean for social stability? Classic American liberalism sees political conflict as something that can be contained by established structures like constitutional laws, an independent judiciary, regular elections.
And guided by cultivating virtue among citizens.
Yes, virtues like civic responsibility, tolerance, empathy, respect for the rule of law. It doesn't view society as this irreconcilable battleground of competing myths or eternal struggles between groups.
Instead, it seeks to manage and resolve conflict within a framework of shared principles.
Aiming for stability and progress through reasoned debate, democratic processes, pursuing a common good that respects individual rights, rather than through enforced dominance or suppressing dissent.
The focus is on processes that allow for ongoing peaceful resolution.
Rather than seeking a final definitive victory for one side.
Manichaean critical theory, dualisms, and deconstruction.
Okay, finally, we arrive at Manichaean critical theory. This component describes how post-liberalism often frames the world in really sharp dualism.
Dualisms, like black and white thinking.
Pretty much. Clear oppositions like order versus chaos, the sacred versus the profane, tradition versus subversion, or just plain good versus evil. It's a way of simplifying complex realities into stark, often moral, binaries. One side is unequivocally good or right, the other is unequivocally bad or wrong, representing a threat.
Creates a strong sense of moral clarity, I suppose. A clear picture of who the good guys and bad guys are.
It does. But it can also lead to an inability to see nuance or appreciate alternative perspectives. Viewing the world as an arena for a definitive struggle between fundamentally opposing forces that simply cannot coexist.
There's a strong sense of urgency, then, in overcoming the bad side.
Very much so.
Now, this is where it gets particularly fascinating for me. It borrows elements from critical theory itself.
Yes, but crucially, it reverses its direction.
Reverses it. How?
Well, traditional critical theory, often associated with, say, the Frankfurt School or various strands of postmodern thought, typically aims to deconstruct power structures from a traditional left-wing perspective, uncovering hidden oppressions related to class, race, gender, etc.
Its target is often traditional hierarchies, perceived injustices.
Right, but post-liberalism uses this critical lens to deconstruct what it sees as the oppressive or morally entropic forms of liberalism, progress, and pluralism, viewing them as hegemonic forces that are undermining true community, virtue, or spiritual order.
So it applies the same tools of deconstruction, but to expose and dismantle the perceived flaws and moral decay within the very liberal order that critical theory often sought to advance or reform.
Exactly. It's a critical theory, but turned against modernity itself.
Okay. The contrast with classic American liberalism seems vital here. Classic American liberalism is definitely moral, right? It understands good and evil exist.
Oh, undoubtedly. It doesn't shy away from moral judgment or the need to oppose injustice. However, it is not apocalyptic in its political outlook.
Not seeing society hurtling towards some inevitable cataclysmic showdown between absolute good and absolute evil.
No. Not where only one can survive. It doesn't mythologize political opponents as inherently evil, nor does it sacralize the state as the ultimate source of all good.
Instead, it maintains a sense of human fallibility, the ongoing need for prudence, wisdom in governing.
Yes, recognizing that no earthly system or political movement is perfect or entirely free of vice, rather than believing in a final, decisive battle or a perfect earthly utopia. It's a more incremental, more realistic view of moral and political progress.
So what does this all mean for you as you encounter these ideas out in the world? Classic American liberalism, because it recognizes human fallibility and imperfection. It affirms moral realism, the idea there are objective moral truths and maybe a sense of providence, an underlying order.
But it also strongly advocates for humility in our political claims.
Humility.
Yes, and for the power of persuasion through reasoned argument, civil debate, and for peaceful pluralism operating under the rule of law.
It seeks a pathway forward where competing ideas can coexist, even in rich society.
Right, where diverse groups can find common ground, engage in productive dialogue within a shared civic framework, rather than always being locked in a struggle for absolute dominance or seeing every disagreement as an existential fight-to-the-death kind of threat.
It's a philosophy that champions finding unity amidst difference,
rather than demanding uniformity. Conclusion.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, what is post-liberalism at its core? You can really see it now as this multi-headed reaction, can't you? Part profound metaphysical critique of modern thought's foundations.
Yeah.
Part distinctive political theology, seeking to resacralize the state and public life. Part like civilizational nostalgia for perceived past glories and certainties.
There's an element to that sometime.
And part a determined call for philosophical revolution. aiming to build a new social and political order from entirely distinct principles.
It's definitely a comprehensive challenge to the assumptions that have guided much of the Western world for centuries.
And it presents a coherent alternative vision, you have to admit, for how societies might be organized.
And what about classic American liberalism? In contrast, when we view it through this lens, it's that enduring conviction, really, that ordered liberty is truly possible. It believes this can be achieved when virtue is actively cultivated in the citizenry,
Right.
when reason is trusted as a guide for individuals and the state, when individual conscience is respected as the ultimate arbiter of personal moral truth.
Crucial.
And when the state itself remains limited by the principles of natural law, it's a vision that seeks to balance freedom with responsibility, individual rights with civic duties, universal reason with recognizing inherent moral truths that bind us.
A framework built on trust in individual capacity and limited government. Well, that's all for today's deep dive, and we truly hope this exploration has given you a clearer, maybe more nuanced understanding of these powerful ideas, helping you navigate the intellectual currents shaping our world. Until then, maybe consider this. If the search for a perfect, unified social order inevitably leads, or perhaps often leads, to a reduction of individual liberty and the suppression of difference, where do we as free individuals find that necessary balance between our collective needs for meaning and belonging and our individual aspirations for autonomy and self-determination?
That's the question, isn't it?
Keep asking those deeper questions.